Tonight, Texas lawmakers debate ways to make going online safer for kids.
There is the potential for kids to get addicted to technology.
Why protecting kids' online activities is taking priority this legislative session. Plus, the U.S. Attorney General takes incoming fire from a Texas senator during a hearing on Capitol Hill.
Can I answer the question?
No, you cannot. You have refused to answer the question.
I am answering your question.
Both Texas senators demand answers on criminal justice from the nation's top cop, and later addressing the state's housing affordability crisis. What possible solutions researchers are urging Texas lawmakers to pass. Capitol Tonight starts right now.
The prevalence of social media platforms in our kids' lives is having some detrimental effects out there. We see increased statistics.
And that's why state lawmakers are prioritizing protecting kids online. Thanks for joining us. I'm Karina Kling. A bill filed in the Texas House would give parents more control over their kids' online activity. House Speaker Dade Phelan named it a must-pass bill, saying in a statement, quote, "I am eager to see our chamber take on big tech, which for too long has taken advantage of the data and privacy of Texans, and especially our children, who are vulnerable to predatory and addicting algorithms and advertisements on social media platforms." Our Charlotte Scott reports on the bill and how social media can affect teen mental health.
As Texas students navigate life in high school, many of them are also trying to maintain a life online.
Put their phones down.
And when they scroll on social media, big tech companies are collecting data for targeted ads and the algorithm, which feeds users content they're most likely to interact with. Representative Shelby Slauson wants parents to have more control. She filed a bill to give them authority over how digital service providers collect and use minors' information. And as a mom, Representative Slauson is looking out for her own daughters as well.
We do our best to protect their physical well-being, their emotional well-being, and it's incumbent upon us to also protect their online well-being.
The bill would require online platforms to get parental consent before obtaining data from teens over 13 years old, allow parents to delete data that's collected on their children, and allow parents to opt out of addiction-inducing algorithmic targeting. The bill is focused on minors between 13 and 17 years old because the federal government already regulates how companies collect data on kids under 12. Representative Slauson is concerned about trends that show social media use can lead to self-harm, substance abuse, or other mental health issues. One counselor supports this type of legislation for that reason.
There is a definite correlation between depression. There's been an uprise in eating disorders, just negative body image for boys and girls. And that is definitely comes from a lot of social media exposure.
Another counselor says putting laws in place to regulate data collection and algorithms could help parents understand what's healthy for their kids and what's not.
What you see is with higher amounts of social media use, there's less engagement in other activities, there's less connection in other things. You're impacting sleep patterns, you're impacting all other aspects of development. So it's not so much that the social media is causing the self-harm, but you're replacing some of the healthier things that were there with sometimes content that works against health.
It's not all bad. Both counselors noted that there are some positives to social media. Teens can feel a sense of connection with their friends and family online, and that was especially true during the pandemic. For Capitol Tonight, I'm Charlotte Scott.
A state lawmaker is pushing for Texas parents to get up to 12 weeks paid leave to care for their newborn or adopted child.
For the pro-family stance that we're taking across our state, we need our laws to align with that standard, with those values.
Right now, 74% of Texans don't have access to paid family leave. That's according to the nonprofit advocacy group Every Texan. The Texas Family Act would set up a fund allowing parents full or partial wage replacement up to $1,000 per week. This push comes as the Republican House Speaker implemented 12 weeks of paid parental leave for those working in the Texas House. With us now to discuss this further is the author of the bill, Democratic State Representative Penny Morales-Shaw of Houston. Thanks for being on with us.
Happy to be here.
I know that you laid this out earlier, as we just heard from you, and mentioned the Speaker implementing this for those working in the House. I mean, what has he said about your bill and expanding this on a much bigger level?
We're in discussions with the Speaker's office. The Speaker's office has many policy
members. So there's a member for each area of policy, environmental, state issues, this issue. So we actually are pending a meeting with that particular person. However, we have talked to the chief of staff several times and to get their feedback and to know what their temperature is about this bill. Obviously, with the speaker making that announcement at the beginning of the session, we had no idea he was going to say that. We had already, we're already crafting our bill. So that was very encouraging for us to hear him say that. It was totally out of the blue. So we're hoping that they're on board.
Yeah.
So far, a favorable response. We know that we may have to make modifications, some concessions potentially, but as I said earlier, I don't want to gut the bill. Sure. I'm okay with making some modifications and tweaking it to appease other members that might have concerns. And that's where we stand right now. We file our initial bill, and as all bills go through the process, there's a possibility of amendments or changes or modifications.
Well, and what do you think some of those could look like? Because I'm sure a big part of this is cost and what this could potentially cost the state. What are we looking at here?
Sure. It's not so much the state as it would be, it's the best analysis or analogy I could use is like an unemployment tax. It's very similar to that, and people are very familiar with that. Employers pay a very small percentage. It goes into a fund. If someone's laid off, other than for cause, they can collect unemployment, correct? And this is an employer-contributed fund. So that's what this bill would do. It would create a fund, the Texas Family Act fund, which would be funded by a very small percentage of the wages that are paid out, 0.15%. Okay. And that would be accruing, and if the employee's there long enough, full-time, and they need to take parental leave, a woman or a man, then they can do that.
Yeah. What kind of benefits, does research show, and I know that you guys kind of laid some of these out today, but just about having paid parental leave, not only for the mother, for the father too, but for the babies?
Sure. Well, as I said earlier, there's huge advantages. A lot of businesses do it voluntarily, all the way from small. I've heard stories of small mom and pop businesses, mid-size, all the way up to huge corporations that voluntarily do that. And we know that the huge companies do it, but I've heard, surprisingly, that small businesses have done it. It's a huge attraction to keep employees. Well, to get them, first of all, it makes them more competitive, the employer, but also the retention, the longevity, the loyalty, and just the security that an employee has, knowing that I'm in this possibility of either adopting or bearing a child, that they have that at their place of employment is a huge sense of security for them. So retention, longevity, all of those things are a reward to the employer.
Yeah, we just have about 30 seconds left, but I mentioned the 74%. You mentioned obviously some Texans getting this benefit through their employer, but how many Texans would stand to benefit if this program were implemented?
So every Texan did some analysis on that data, and I think their number was about 144,000.
Okay, so
yes,
per year, every time. Penny Morales-Shaw, we will definitely continue to watch this legislation and get you back on. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Turning to Washington, where U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland testified in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee today. He answered questions from senators on a wide range of subjects, including the investigation into President Biden's son, Hunter.
I promised to leave the matter of Hunter Biden in the hands of the U.S. Attorney for the District of Delaware, who was appointed in the previous administration. I have pledged not to interfere with that investigation, and I have carried through on my pledge.
Investigators are looking into Hunter Biden's income and payments he received while serving on the board of a Ukrainian gas company, which he joined when his father was vice president. That's sparked potential conflict of interest concerns. Texas's 2 senators joined with other Republicans on that powerful Judiciary Committee today in grilling Garland about the federal law enforcement response to some of the most divisive legal and criminal justice issues in the country. Our Washington reporter Rena Diamante has more on the heated hearing.
You're perfectly content with justices being afraid for their children's lives, and you did nothing to prosecute it.
Senator Ted Cruz of Texas tore into Attorney General Merrick Garland at Wednesday's Senate Judiciary Committee hearing. complaining the Justice Department did not file charges against demonstrators who repeatedly protested outside the homes of Supreme Court justices last year.
I did something no Attorney General in the history of the department had ever done before.
Garland said he acted quickly and responsibly by deploying 70 federal marshals to the justices' homes after a leaked draft opinion signaled the court was about to end the constitutional right to an abortion. But Garland said he did not know whether any charges were brought under a law prohibiting picketing outside of a federal judge's home.
The job of the United States Marshals is to defend the lives of
the answer is no.
Is to defend the lives of the justices, and that's their number one priority. They have.
Why are you unwilling to say no? The answer is no. You know it's no. I know it's no. Everyone in this hearing room knows it's no.
The Judiciary Committee hearing was Garland's first appearance on Capitol Hill this year. Cruz and many Republicans on the panel used their questions to push their claims the Justice Department has become politicized against conservatives and that it has done little to stop the fentanyl crisis. Senator John Cornyn of Texas cited a recent meeting he had with school leaders and families in Hays County about fentanyl.
71,000 roughly of fentanyl overdoses. Do you consider your current policies successful?
We have a huge epidemic of fentanyl problem created by intentional acts by the cartels. We are doing everything we can within our resources to fight that.
Garland also said as a result of the bipartisan gun safety law, there are prosecutions related to the trafficking of illegal weapons, as well as grants given out to violence intervention programs. Senator Cornyn brokered a deal over the law, which was passed in the wake of the Uvalde mass shooting. In Washington, Rena Diamante, Capitol Tonight.
Concerns over TickTok continue to grow in Congress. Today, a House committee voted to advance a bill that would make it easier to ban the app in the U.S. The legislation was introduced late last week and fast-tracked by Texas Congressman and Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Michael McCall. Democrats pushed back, claiming they had just days to consider the bill before McCall brought the legislation to a vote. The bill must still receive a vote in the House, on the House floor and in the Senate. Coming up on Capitol Tonight, restricting transgender college athletes, the latest push by Texas Republicans to extend the ban to the collegiate level. Plus, the need for affordable housing in Texas, what some researchers say is key for lawmakers to consider. Welcome back to Capitol Tonight. We want to get you caught up now on some of the other political stories making headlines across Texas. A state lawmaker wants to ban child marriage with no exceptions. Houston Democratic Representative John Rosenthal filed a bill to close a loophole left by a 2017 law that let 16 and 17-year-olds get married if they are emancipated. According to the Journal of Adolescent Health, Texas had more than 40,000 child marriages between 2000 and 2018. That's the most of any state during that period. A majority of Republican House lawmakers are rallying behind a bill that would restrict which college sports teams transgender Texans can join. Last session, Governor Abbott signed a similar bill into law dealing with K-12 school sports. He's voiced support for this year's expanded legislation, and it's a top priority for Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. More than 3.5 million Texans on food stamps are losing extra food benefits as of today. According to Feeding Texas, those residents were getting at least $95 more per month to spend at the grocery store because of federal COVID-19 emergency relief efforts. That program ended, and now Texans will lose around $340 million in benefits from February to March. Being able to afford a home is a growing problem in Texas. Between inflation, high demand, and rising property taxes, researchers at the University of Texas say it's becoming a crisis. Texas ranks 49th in state spending on housing and community development. Researchers say existing housing support is too hard to access. There's a lack of sufficient funding at the state level, and local regulations are affecting the housing supply. They're calling on lawmakers to reevaluate statewide affordable housing programs and pass additional property tax relief. Joining us now to discuss this further is one of the authors of this report, Stephen Pedigo. He's the director of the LBJ Urban Lab and teaches at the LBJ School of Public Affairs at UT Austin. Good to see you.
It's good to be back.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Mentioned some of the factors there that you guys were looking at. I mean, why has it gotten so hard to afford a house in Texas?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of issues at play here. First and foremost, in a lot of our cities, I think when you look at the permitting process, right, the permits that are required to build, in some cities it can take upwards of 18 months to pull a permit and actually go through the affordable housing process, which you can imagine that if you're a developer or even just doing your own renovations or adding an ADU to your own house, it takes a long time to go through that process. So permitting is a big issue. There are a lot of cities in the state of Texas that have not updated their land use code. We're sitting in one of them, Austin. And so when you've got old land use restrictions that require lower density and not encouraging higher density, look, we can get more houses and more density on some places if we were to just go back and reevaluate our land use code. And then there's things like parking minimums, there's things like the idea of lot size minimums, all those types of things that kind of play into the built environment, which you can imagine is that what's interesting about Texas is that we've got a lot of land, right? We're a big state, but we got a lot of limited land in places where people want to be. So we've got to really think about how we use that space.
Well, and you mentioned this in the report, but what about a lack of sufficient funding? I mean, where should the state dedicate more money in order to provide more affordable housing? Is it just the state? Yeah, my graduate students who worked with us on this report went back and looked at spending, and particularly community housing spending. And Texas ranks actually 49th in the country. There's only one state we're ahead of, and that's Nebraska. And so we're not a state that typically has that really invested in a housing or community development. There's states like New York and Oregon and Massachusetts and California that are doing that, but it's not typically something that we do here in the state of Texas. So what we have to do, I think, is really incentivize our development community and our cities to be better at encouraging affordable housing. So give you an example, right? Let's imagine that, why can't we get state lawmakers to incentivize cities to redo your land use code, make your permitting process faster. Let's just make the process more efficient. That'll go a long way in terms of getting more housing built here in the state of Texas. Lawmakers pushing property tax relief, prioritizing that. I mean, what's the best way to go about this in order to really have meaningful relief that could potentially help with this? Yeah, I mean, we write about it in the report. We support the property tax relief. We think it's a good thing. The only thing I would caution lawmakers to say is, look, as we think about affordability in the state of Texas, that's just one policy lever. We've got to think more broadly. We have to do a lot of these things that we just described otherwise to really incentivize and get the private sector to engage with us as a partner in this development. The state's not going to build itself out of this problem. It's going to require public and private partnerships to do this. Yeah, and then we always hear about renters and various things like that. Well, property tax, I mean, alleviation, the impact for renters. There was a great report out from the Houston Community Foundation that found that 50% of renters in Harris County are rent burdened. And so one of the things we don't hear anything about right now is help for renters here in Texas. And that's something that should be forefront of the agenda as well. And we just have 30 seconds left, but I want to ask you this before you leave. I mean, how could not addressing this affect the state's economy, the economic competitiveness? Yeah, look, our message to everyone outside of Texas is come to Texas because we have an affordability advantage. You can have a great family, a great lifestyle, and afford to buy your house here. That's soon evaporating here. The most recent example of that in terms of losing, 52% of people that was polled in the Texas Lyceum poll recently said that they feel the crunch of housing affordability, that they're spending more on their income than they thought in the state of Texas. That's a competitive issue for our state. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I know we're all feeling it. So, yeah, Stephen Pettigo, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for having me. Pleasure. Cheers. A bill that would have banned citizens of certain countries from buying Texas land was revised after public backlash. State Senator Lois Kolkhorst filed legislation to ban citizens of China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia from purchasing property in Texas. Now she's changed the bill so that dual citizens, legal permanent residents, and people fleeing persecution from those countries are free to buy property in the state. The original bill received criticism and protests from Democrats who said it was discriminatory and offensive. A similar law was signed in 2021 banning agreements with those same countries related to critical infrastructure in the state. Still to come on Capitol tonight, one of the nation's largest political gatherings kicks off in Washington. The Texans and others taking the stage at CPAC as the 2024 race for the White House starts to take shape. Welcome back. Thousands of activists and elected officials are descending on the Washington, D.C. area for the start of the conservative movement's most influential gathering of the year. Several Texans are set to speak at the conservative conference known as CPAC, including Senator Ted Cruz and Congressman Ronnie Jackson. Angie Gonzalez is in Washington with what to expect, including a look at who is and isn't making an appearance as the 2024 race for the White House starts to take shape.
For 2023, the Conservative Political Action Conference, better known as CPAC, makes its return to the D.C. area after stints in Florida and Texas in 2021 and 2022. Carly Tomaine is one of this year's first scheduled speakers.
The panel that I'm going to be doing about activism are really good educational and also skill set oriented opportunities to learn both the technological side and how to become a better activist and be more effective, but also how to communicate our message a little bit better with others.
While this will be Tomaine's first time speaking at the conference, a number of repeat guests are on the confirmed list of attendees. But this year, who isn't going is getting almost as much attention as who is.
Wow, thank you very much.
While former President Donald Trump, Senators Ted Cruz and Rick Scott, and Representatives Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, and James Comer are scheduled to appear, former Vice President Mike Pence and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis are skipping the event. Todd Belt with the George Washington University says Trump's participation is likely the reason why.
When Donald Trump is there, he sucks all the oxygen out of a room. It's really hard for anybody who wants to take on Trump to really carve out their lane and get their message out there.
Other big names missing from the list of announced speakers: House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, and Republican National Committee Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel. Belt says the event offers the most to those trying to figure out how to get involved.
They have breakout rooms and discussions of policy issues, and it's really a big opportunity for people to organize for future campaigns.
Some have linked this year's abandonment of CPAC to appearances by guests still touting false election fraud claims and sexual assault allegations against CPAC chairman Matt Schlapp, claims he's denied. Tomaine says she isn't worried about the guest list and still sees CPAC as an important opportunity, particularly for young conservatives.
I think it's a great lineup. I'm definitely excited to hear from really everybody and just kind of see what their takes are, especially going into 2024.
Speaking of 2024, presidential candidate Nikki Haley and former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who many believe is considering a run, are scheduled to attend the conference, which continues through Saturday. In Washington, Angie Gonzalez, Spectrum News.
And that is all the time that we have tonight. We're back on Friday with the latest in Texas politics. Until then, thanks for watching. Stay safe and have a great night.